Good evening and welcome to the Menil to In Dialogue on Aimé Césaire and Specters of Noon. Thanks to all of you, near and far, for joining us. My name is Roberto Tejada, a poet, art writer in Houston, where I'm on the faculty of the University of Houston, the Department of English, Creative Writing, and in the School of Art History program. I've had the good fortune to work with the Puerto Rico-based collaborative duo Allora Calzadilla and with colleagues at the Menil on the publication forthcoming from Yale University Press in February 2021, that situates and documents the group of 7 large-scale works we'll be discussing this evening, but with a particular focus on the thought and writings of the influential writer and anti-colonial thinker from Martinique, a major poet of the 20th and 21st centuries, Aimé Césaire. The program tonight is another in a series of exchanges around the current exhibition at the Menil Collection, Allora Calzadilla, Specters of Noon, curated by senior curator Michelle White. You are invited to view the exhibition in person here in Houston, where it will remain on display until June 20th of next year. Information about visiting hours and in-person protocols are available on the Menil website, where you will also find downloadable gallery guides in English and Spanish, as well as an archive of previous talks, including one with curator Michelle White and artists Jennifer Allora and Guillermo Calzadilla. Special thanks are in order this evening to Lauren Pollock, Manager of Public Programs, and Tony Martinez, Program Coordinator, and to Cesar Cabrera, Technical Manager, for making tonight's event possible. The intention for this evening is to transform the platform of live streaming itself as a kind of extension or supplement to, at any rate, an added element around the exhibition Specters of Noon and the energies, ideas, histories, and encounters that occasion the works on display. To that end, we're joined by Guillermo Calzadilla, one half of the artist duo Allora Calzadilla, based in San Juan, Puerto Rico. Their work has gained international recognition and has been included in premier venues, including the Venice Biennales of 2005 and 2015. With references to the historical record, to geopolitical events, and to a constellation of related cultural references, including the 1940s encounter of André Breton with Aimé and Suzanne Césaire, Allora Calzadilla enliven a space of encounter between materials and metaphors that stage the past in the present. Also in the room this evening are Johanna Auguiac and Molly Nesbit. Welcome.
Hello.
Johanna Auguiac is currently the director of the Aimé Césaire Foundation in Martinique. She's the founder as well of the BIAC Martinique, International Biennial of Contemporary Art, and she has served as a co-curator of numerous art festivals and exhibitions in the US, France, and the Caribbean. Molly Nesbit is an art historian and writer. Her many books include, recently, The Pragmatism and the History of Art, 2013, and Midnight, The Tempest Essays of 2017. The 2019 recipient of the College Art Association's Distinguished Lifetime Achievement Award for Writing and Art. This year, she became a member of the School of Historical Studies at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton. The critical role of Johanna and Molly will become clearer as the story unfolds this evening. But all stories have a beginning, and beginnings are probably another name for that process we call intention. Edward Said used that reference in a book he wrote about beginnings. He says they make a way along the road, they show a field of play and habits of mind, prompting what the Surrealists probably meant by communicating vessels. So we thought that today we'd begin with a communicating vessel in a 3-minute clip from an 11-minute film made by Allora Calzadilla in 2008. The film takes its title from a line in the first act of Aimé Césaire's groundbreaking long poem, Notebook to Return to the Native Land, written in 1939 and published in the French avant-garde magazine Volonté. Made in post-Katrina New Orleans, the film by Allora Calzadilla focuses on 2 scenes. They write, the interior of a flooded house in the lower 9th Ward, the historically poor, predominantly African-American neighborhood that was completely destroyed by the failed levee system, and the wetlands of the lower Mississippi River Delta, out of which the city of New Orleans was carved. The film depicts a resident of the 9th Ward, Isaiah McCormick, playing a set of window blinds in his house. So these analogies between the 2 scenes posed questions about ecological witness witness bearing and environmental justice. And it seems to me it's a mood evoked by Césaire in The Notebook, upsetting the colonial view that links misery and spectacle when he wrote that a man screaming is not a dancing bear. Could we have that clip? A Man Screaming is Not a Dancing Bear will be on display at the Aimé Césaire Foundation in Martinique. And the audience here in Houston can view and the audience out there and online can view the film on the Menil website, where it will reside for all of next week. It serves as a way along the road to other scenes this evening, communicating vessels that connect Aimé Césaire to his poetry and political writings, to a perspective he and others named negritude. And these in turn are linked to the particulars of place, Martinique, the Absalon Forest, Puerto Rico, and the group of works here in Houston. Johanna will begin by reading a passage from the cahier that gives the film its title, and then speak about the work of Césaire and his legacy in the Césaire house, Molly, Guillermo, and Johanna will then relate a trip to the birthplace of Césaire and the location where André Breton meets the books of Césaire and then the man himself, and how that visit opens up modes of thought and art making in Allora Calzadilla's work. Johanna?
Yes. Et je lui dirai encore, ma bouche sera la bouche des malheurs qui n'ont point de bouche. Ma voix, la liberté de celle qui s'affaisse au cachot du désespoir. Et venant, je me dirai à moi-même, et surtout mon corps, aussi bien que mon âme, gardez-vous de vous croiser les bras en l'attitude stérile du spectateur, car la vie n'est pas un spectacle, car une mer de douleur n'est pas un proscenium, car un homme qui crie n'est pas un ours qui danse.
There are those final lines of "not a spectacle, a sea of miseries is not a proscenium, a man screaming is not a dancing bear." Molly, maybe you'd like to now begin talking about this visit to Martinique.
With pleasure. Guillermo and Jennifer and I have known each other for a while. We've worked together before. That work has involved many different places. We met actually in Dakar. But you know, over time, as we've worked together, what I've realized is that there are many rainforests and jungles and swamps in the mix as we go forward. And so I wasn't altogether surprised when I got a phone call from them saying, we're doing a project at Specters of Noon for the Menil. Would you like to write something for it? So I said, sure, because I'm agreeable. But also because I knew there'd be a voyage and an adventure the minute I started to say yes. And the proposal was very concrete. They asked me if I would like to go to Martinique. And at that point, I became very enthusiastic for personal reasons, which I'll explain. But their reason for going is equally personal. So I think we should start with Guillermo's reasons for looking south to Martinique across the Caribbean. Start we made a PowerPoint or a flow of things to talk about and show you. So we could start that.
Can we bring that up?
Please.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
Take it away, Roberto.
There we go.
Now we should start first, I guess, with Johanna, because this is part of her image flow, which gets us to Guillermo's reason for wanting to go. But what we did as we made our voyage was, and our plans for the voyage was to contact her. And knowing that she was, based in Martinique, but also she was heading up this foundation for to oversee the legacy of Aimé Césaire and make it take shape in a place to visit. And so we knew we were going to the house of Aimé Césaire, and so we start there, I guess.
Yeah. So here we have the view of the house of Aimé Césaire, which is a very traditional, typical Creole house, with the gallery all around, open windows and doors all around the house. It's a very authentic, humble house, in Fort-de-France, in the heights of the city that Aimé Césaire was very fond of because he was the mayor of the city of Fort-de-France. But not only that, he was the one who put the city out of flow, basically, out of flow, and water, and make a city being like a city to be able to live in, basically. And Aimé Césaire was born in in 1913, and he died in 2008. And the city of Fort-de-France bought the house of Aimé Césaire in 2009. And we have the project. In fact, we're working on it to restore the house, to make a whole rehabilitation, and very some transformations are going to be made. However, the authenticity of the house is the main focus and will stay, the same. So this is.
And I think we have more, don't we? Next.
Yes. So that's an overview of the house by night. It was like an event we are doing for June 26th for the day of his birthday. We're trying, during this day to memorize and have actors, saying his text, and in fact, for this occasion, we have a painter, a choreographer, and comedian, and a drum player, because Aimé Césaire was very fond of drum, and we could find in his literature a rhythm And you have a poem called Tam Tam, for instance. But there is like very often in his lyrism, you know, a rhythm of, if there is one, it's rhythmic, a rhythmic rhythm. Here it's the back, one part of the back of the house with the banana trees on the right side. And on the left, it's another view, you know, of the house. So you see it's a very humble, very quiet house also. It's interesting because the way it's located, it is in the city, but you could have the feeling that you're not in the city, in a sense, you know. It does have this little feeling, you know, in it. Oh yeah, here you can see the dining room, and in the back, the living room. So this is like very like one model furniture, you know, in the sense when you go to the store, you ask for the table and the chairs and then, you know, the buffet, you know, and it's very like someone who was very not in materialistic owning. And basically everyone is very surprised when they get in this house, because what you realize right away, what is precious, it is books. And we have today, when we're doing the inventory, we have about 4,000 books, you know, in his home. And this is another view of the dining room. He was fond of the virtue of the plants, natural, you know, hearing, you know, someone very like very close to nature. In fact, he found a lot of its inspiration in nature, and his poetic, you know. He used to say regarding his politics, you have just look in the nature and you will find what I'm telling you about. Or if you want to understand my politics, read my poetry. And then I will say, you know, when I don't know what to do in a situation, I go in the nature and I look up around, and I will find, I'm sure, a solution, a key of something, how to solve something, you know. And because he was mayor for decades, you know, like 50 years, and he was also a deputy of Martinique in the French, you know, government. And that's another view of his library, you know. So what we're planning to do, you know, that these spaces will not change for the restoration of the house. People will be able to get in and to even sit, you know, in the dining room and even in the living room, and just be able to pull off books and read books that Césaire wrote, but also books that he read. So you have here, like, he was a very, like, you could find in his library, like, about 14th century, 16th century, up to the mid-20th century authors, writers. It's a very heteroclite library with philosophy, of course, poetry, literature, theater. So you go from, I mean, his fans, you know, were Rimbaud, Lautréamont, Mallarmé, Baudelaire, and then you have the anthropologue, you know, Michel Héris, who used to be also his very close friends, and you will have, of course, Victor Hugo. You know, it's a very like on dit la librairie de honnête homme, the library of the honest man. I don't know if in English we say that, you know, and of course all the classic like Stendhal, you know, Beckett also, because the absurd in the work of Beckett was something he was very close to, you know. And so here it's interesting place. It's the same space that is his bedroom, that is in the back, and he did a little space for his office room. And you could see that what we see is the back of the dresser, in fact, and a part of the shelves. And he used to put, you know, everything he could get under his hand that has sense for him. So nature again. You see, there's this big tree on the right side, in the middle, who used to be destroyed during the volcano, the Mount Pelée, when it had the eruption. We will go and see picture of what the volcano was capable of doing. But he used to go up quite often to visit, you know, this tree, who, when it was destroyed, stood back by itself, and he was like amazed to see how nature is grounded. And he made often this metaphor with roots, you know, as being standing, you know, with his roots, you know, it's a way of standing up. And so you could have a picture, yeah, of the family and friends and people he work with in politics. And that's another view of his library. And so you see the lighting, you know, it's like umbrella, backup, to do the lighting, so there is this kind of inventivity, in some of the objects of the house. As a matter of fact, a lot of the objects we found at the house are gift. A lot of them. So it used to be like gift from the surrealist, whatever, Lam, Picasso, Braque, all his fans, Masson, and then gift also that everyone would come and offer to him when he was a mayor. It's interesting because he doesn't make a priority in the reception of the gift. They'll all have in his house the same value, in a sense. He put them on the same status. He wasn't at all into a vertical personae.
We'll come back to the house, but I think what struck me about it, I think Guillermo too, is that house condenses a lot of different things, because it contains a world, but it's not just the world of a man. It's got a past and a present, but what I also felt very strongly when I was there is that it had a future contained in it as well. And when we visited Martinique, as we'll show you, what we also understood is that Aimé Césaire, because he was mayor, he was the deputy representative to the French Chambre des Députés, or Congress, for many, many years, for decades, that in fact his work involved the work of a man of state as well as a man of letters, but he was also there as a great human leader. And so the house condenses a kind of legacy of Aimé Césaire that is, well, it's very big. It doesn't sort of begin and end with him in the end.
Yeah.
But Guillermo and I didn't understand that until, sort of viscerally, until we got there and spent time and also got a baptism from Johanna into the mysteries of all of this. But we both had these convictions that we really wanted to go. And so Guillermo, for you, it starts with a book.
Right.
Notebook.
The notebook for the return to the native land. It's a book that I've had for, I don't know, years, for 25 years, and I keep reading it. Something that I always return to. And
this is your copy of it, right?
That's my copy.
On the right. On the right.
Right. Yeah, with the Wilfredo Lamb, picture, which was, one of the first artists that I, in art school, really early, young.
In Puerto Rico, where?
In Puerto Rico, yeah, in my art school here, became an electromagnetic force for me, and Aimé Césaire, and this book has been always a force for me that I always return to, and somehow, yeah.
Well, it's like a generator or something, isn't it?
Yeah. Absolutely.
And for me, I mean, so the reasons, we wanted to go are very personal. And for me, could I have the next, please? It has to do with the human legacy of Aimé Césaire, who was taught high school when he went back to Martinique in 1939. And among his students, maybe not directly in his classroom, but he was the kind of guru teacher, was Edouard Glissant, and also France Fanon. It was quite a school. And Aimé Césaire becomes, a force to get them going as writers and thinkers and citizens of the world. And the young Edouard Glissant, whom you see here, goes to Paris, takes a PhD in philosophy, writes, like Aimé Césaire, poetry alongside and inside everything else. His first book of poems is called Son of the Conscience. Could I have the next, please? And he goes on to have a very rich and interesting life. But towards the end of it, we meet at a project we call the Utopia Station, which is a big collective artist project, a mix that sought to put the utopia question before us all in 2003 as the United States was marching to war in Iraq. And Edouard was very important. He was a pillar of Utopia Station. Hans-Ulrich Obrist knew him already. Rick Tirvanit and I, met and re-met and found him wonderful and also very inspiring. But Edouard, when he talked about utopia and what it could be and what kind of a future we could have if we started to think more concretely about it, talked about how you would have to, on the way, pass through something which he called the inextricable of the world, and which means something like the unescapable matter, physical matter. And it's only by passing through that you can save our imaginary, he said. And then in passing through that, you would have to suffer a tremblement, an earthquake. And so we paid attention. We talked about this. We had conversations with him repeatedly as we met. This happened over the course of a few years. And then the next, please. And he began to put his thoughts about aesthetics together into a collection that he called the New Region of the World. And the New Region of the World meant collecting all of these ideas together. But this idea of the tremblement was something that Edouard and Aimé Césaire too believed resided in language itself, in Creole French. And so Edouard didn't like to speak in English. He preferred to speak in Creole, his Creole French. We brought him to Vassar to speak. Could I have the next, please? And he gave a talk that pulled the whole question of life on Martinique forward. Could I have the next, please? Into a different way to negotiate the questions of identity and difference. And for Edouard, the idea of difference was not an absolute. Difference came through a contact of mixing together. You don't lose yourself in the contact. You're expanded by the contact. Could I have the next, please? And later I came to understand that his ideas about all of this were standing on the shoulders of Aimé Césaire and in the discourse on colonialism. So as next, please, I think we should just touch down and move on because we've got to get to utopia somewhere further down the road here. So as Guillermo put the question to me about going to Martinique, he said, we would like to go, and Jennifer and I, to a specific rainforest, and we would like to reproduce a walk that Aimé Césaire took with André Breton in 1941. Can I have the next, please? When they arrived on a ship, getting out of Europe, World War II had broken out. They were escaping running for their lives. Their ship takes them to Martinique, and they have this contact, which is a contact of difference and fellow travelers, and it's a momentous contact. And so Jennifer and Guillermo wanted to think about using that contact as another generator, let's say, for the Specters at Noon. And the net result of the contact produced books, as well as friendship, as well as, an explosion of ideas with the two of them. In 1948, André Breton with Masson made a kind of compendium that they called Martinique Snake Charmer. And Aimé Césaire that same year brought out his own book of poems called Soleil Coupé. Yeah. But we should take all of this with this, you know, all these personal reasons and these expectations and this idea that we're going to a source of power, some kind of power that we can tap and access and, you know, revere. We take it to this idea of going to the rainforest. Can I go next? And this is what that rainforest looked like. Now the rainforest, this is Guillermo's picture of the rainforest. And it was quite a day. We'll get to it in a minute. But as you can see, it's a beautiful, magical place that Johanna will take us to. But she takes us to it, can I have the next please, after we cross the city. And so we cross the city with its old colonial monuments that have been, let's say, adjusted. Empress Josephine has lost her head.
Yes.
And we go right away to Aimé Césaire's mayor's office, which has become a museum. Can I have the next? The museum, the mayor's office, the old town city hall has become a theater now, but one goes to the old Hotel de Ville, to the theater, one goes inside, next please. And there one is confronted with beautiful exhibits. The old mayor's office is full of displays which help tell the story of his work as mayor, but also talk about the poetry magazine that he and his friends started in Martinique the minute they got back in 1939. And it's called Tropique.
Tropique. Yeah.
And Tropique, the whole reason that André Breton met Aimé Césaire in the spring of 41 was because he'd gone to a ribbon shop. We also went to the ribbon shop.
Yes.
To buy a ribbon for his little daughter. And on the counter of the ribbon shop was Tropique. And he said, tiens, you know, this kind of poetry in Fort-de-France, I must meet these people. They met immediately. And could I have the next, please? Off they went on their adventure. Breton also then opened the Cahiers du Retour du Pays. And next, please. Everything begins to combine. But as we go into the museum to see the office of Aimé Césaire, we go up this stairway, which is simply amazing because it contains lines of poetry.
La Négraille assise inattendument, debout dans les cabines, debout sur le pont, debout sous le soleil, debout. Son dénuement maritime girant à la dérive, debout à la barre, debout à la boussole, debout sous les étoiles, debout. Et le navire lustral s'avançait un pavé sur les eaux écroulées, extrait du cahier de Utopie natale.
And the people are standing up. That's what's going on in that Creole French. And to be walking up those stairs, reading that makes you rise with them. It's something. Can I have the next, please? But we have all of this. By now we are grounded, risen, as we go to the rainforest. And Guillermo, I think it's up to you now to tell the story of the rainforest. It was an adventure.
Yeah, I mean, we were just fascinated by this encounter, you know, and we learn through it of how, you know, this forest was the location where these two worlds met, and they walked this trail, and we were just fascinated by this idea, you know. And we thought of Penumbra, which is a shadow within a shadow. It's an encounter of things, right? And sort of use that idea of like things, the encounter between things, and how out of that two things something else yields, you know, and something else happens out of that. And that was the starting point to develop this work, that essentially was to recreate that forest in the most scientific, rigorous possible way, with all the different species of trees where this encounter took place, and then have that forest projected as shadows at the Menil in Houston, following the sun path of Houston, so that the shadows in Houston and the shadows of this forest meet throughout, you know, the duration of the exhibition.
Could we have the next slides, please?
Oh, you see,
Yeah.
yeah, I just wanted to remind the flower we have on the previous, over here on the right side, the balisier, which is like the emblematic when Aimé Césaire created his own party of Martinique. He used to be at the Communist Party, and then he left. That's when he wrote the letters à Maurice Torres, and in 56, and then in 58 he put together his own party. So it's interesting because it was one of the first time Martinique as a party, a political party, within its specificities of the country. You know, usually there used to be like big party from France, and then you have like, you know, a referent, you know, back up, you know. But over there you had someone who, coming from him, you know, from his own thought, his own geographical environment, you know, and culture and patrimony, you know, legacy, to put together, you know, the party, you know, for the Martinican people.
Yeah, and so what's interesting is that the Surrealists are able to take some of these motifs and combine them. They do what they can with them, but it's, you know, all of this is not so far away from the city. Things are not separated. It's a very diverse landscape and ecosystem. Can we have the next, please? But relaying it all, you know, in its scale. It's not a huge, great big island, but the scale of it is really, I don't know, it's a universe. It's got that kind of scale. But at the same time, Aimé Césaire himself is not trying to occupy it like a god. You know, it's very clear that as far as he's concerned in his work, that the scale of things must be human. We have the next. But as we, and we shouldn't dwell too much on this because we need to keep going to the Menil show. The Surrealists, it turned out, already had a clue of what awaited them in Martinique, although they had no idea they would go there in the mid-30s. Guillermo, you're the one who's the expert on this. So when the volcano erupted in 1902 and melted the city of Saint-Pierre, it left behind ruin, but in the ruin there were these things.
Yes, some objects, especially a light bulb that behaved with the extreme temperature, like paper. It didn't crack, but it became flat. Something so fragile, right? So these morphological, transformations that happen by the excessive, brutal heat temperature of the volcano. And these objects made it into an exhibition of surrealism in Paris, way before they actually came to Martinique. So there was this interesting connection between surrealism and Martinique and encounters, right?
Yeah, and this is the view of the Surrealist exhibition of objects in May 1936. Can we have the next, please? But in Saint-Pierre, they now have a museum which you visit in the middle, and they've left parts of the city in their devastated form. Next, please. But there's a museum in which you can see what the mountain did to life. And it was a horrific situation. And 28,000 people die. It's terrible. And these little objects which survive, they somehow take something of the power of the mountain and the tremblement to another place. Something's been released for them. Can we have the next, please? And you can see why the Surrealists would be so entranced because of what had happened, right, to l'objet, the commodity, the residue of the bourgeoisie once nature had seized it in its own way. Could we have the next, please? And then we went to the house. After all of this, we then go to the house, and that's how we come to understand, next please, that the house itself is full of experience that is local and worldly, let's say, at the same time. It's a very complicated, layered place in a good way. It's a real generator. And I'm glad you're going to be having, spaces for art there, because I think residencies and so on, exhibitions, I think it'll be really fertile for people to come. Could we have the next, please? But we were also entranced by the books, which are out on the dining room table, because Aimé Césaire was a naturalist. He loved, and nothing escaped him, clearly. Could we have the next?
He was ahead of his time regarding nature, regarding women's rights. So many themes of today's actuality, his thought, it's a very original and it's a very actual thought, definitely.
Next, please. And we went to a meeting of the PPM, and we heard a speech by Serge Letchimy, and it was, and there's the balisé, the red flower, held high. There's Aimé Césaire on the meeting hall wall.
Portrait.
Can we have the next, please? And it's a cause and a worldview that remains live in terms of real politics, right? Pushing for the future. And it all it went together so beautifully, Johanna. We were not there for very long, but when I say baptism, man, it was
completely.
And we even got to see, next please, the grave of my friend Edouard Glissant, who's buried there. This is his tomb.
In Diamant.
In Diamant, which we'll show you in a minute. And in the on the grave, it's inscribed, this is so wily of Edouard, "Nothing is true, everything is alive," which is kind of breathtaking. Everything was alive. Can we have the next, please? And so we, with all of this, we too looked from le diamant to the diamant, and things expanded. We also went to Aimé Césaire's birthplace, where the house no longer exists. Next, please.
Which is a landmark there. Basse Pointe.
Marked with a landmark which has become a tree, like kind of beautifully. And one more thing, because we need to get to the show. Guillermo took all of this back And from it, they got the Specters of the Noon. But I think your show in many ways, it was already in, the plans were far along, but in fact, the kind of expansion we were, riding, I guess, in Martinique, it's in your show too, but in ways that are not literal, I would say, right? I mean, you're working with similar kinds of forces that one finds in Martinique, one finds in the poetry and the politics and the visions of our, of the great Aimé Césaire. It's a legacy that you're trying to work with as artists. Is that fair?
Yeah, totally. Absolutely.
Well, should we maybe look and see what that means? Because don't we have?
There's a slide that has the discourse on colonialism, which I refer viewers to look at primarily to get a sense of the politics and poetics that Johanna mentioned, that they are combined and they are inseparable in this kind, and also influenced by surrealism insofar as they have these kind of convulsive effects and they're a kind of rebellion of the senses. But this idea of nothing is true, everything is alive might be the best way then to shift to a short film we'll show, which is a video of the exhibition, which will give a sense also of a kind of travel and walk through a forest, the Absalon forest, that the galleries become a kind of space itself. Can we have that clip?
Mid-August, mid-autumn, mid-back, mid-brain, mid-bridge, mid-calf,
I think we'll pass on to we have some poems, but we'll pass on to the installation shots of the exhibition. And Guillermo, Johanna, Molly, maybe you might want to make some connections between the trip and the exhibition itself and some of the relationships between Césaire's thought and these works that we're looking at.
I mean, I guess the thing about that we like so much about Césaire is that how he was able to make these convergences between poetry, politics, decolonization, ecology, and how was, and I guess in a way we try to have, to make the exhibition a poem of sorts, right? A poem that is written with materials, with lights, using time, using the space instead of using words, and having all these things converge, and overlay throughout, from light passing and changing to, the flowers, for example, being recycled plastics, electronics. So you have each flower is a universe of its on its own. To have, a field of electromagnetism, a force field, like in one time and place, but of course it's linked to the politics of electricity and energy, right? So you have these things, a transformer, that it's the result of an explosion, of an event, that is from a hurricane, right? But again, that explosion, that remainder that one sees, is also a complex convergence of a series of elements: humans, electricity, power, stocks, bonds, oil, to the sun and solar mythologies, that were abundant on his poetry, and decolonization. Discourse on colonialism is another book. I mean, after all, I live in a colony. Puerto Rico is still a colony. It's one of the oldest colonies in the world. So a lot of his work and how he's able to deal with all this complex universe of relations, and it's always been an inspiration and a force of a guidance. There is a room that is, you have the two things. You have the shadows from the Absalon forest that comes out of the result of, in 1941, Breton and Lamb, escaping from Martinique and arriving there and taking these walks in 1941, right? And then in the same room, you have a tree that fell in an old forest, same year in 1941 in France, by a storm, and that tree opened the space of Lascaux. So you have in this room this play between prehistory and the origins, the beginnings of humanity, juxtaposed with the ends of humanity, if you wish, with the World War II and the atomic bomb. And you have Bataille and you have Breton in the same room, strangely enough. So there are a lot of convergences and juxtapositions that happen. Also, something that the space itself, or the tree is in that room that you're seeing, we covered the entire roof area, but only left a circle, like an oculus, the type of aperture that you will see in a cave, to somehow refer to, like Lascaux, or caves, or openings, or entrances. So it's like a beam of light comes in during noon, right? And it slowly disappears throughout the day. So you have the entire exhibition is illuminated with natural light. So you see the light changing, the luminosity of it. The sun has such a force and such a play in the exhibition. So he's for sure there in the exhibition, as a force, without a doubt.
I wonder if you might say something about the sound design that David Lang produced, because there's a story behind that as well. Some of the references.
Absolutely. For the piece of Penumbra, the one that in the forest of Absalon, we also wanted to have a sound that was the result of an encounter. So we worked with David, a composer, friend of ours, and he found a recording of insects in that forest, and he used that as a reference to develop this composition that was made with violins. We found violins as an instrument that was interesting because Tartini, which is a violin player, he developed this methodology of creating combination tones that for us are equivalent to a shadow. which is an encounter of two tones. So you have another encounter, an encounter of two tones that when put together, they create a third tone that is it's the result of this tone, but it's something that is not real. It's like a shadow, right? Like it's like an acoustic, yeah, I don't know what how to explain it. But it's a result of this encounter. So that was another type of encounter. And then with sonic encounter, and so it's very subtle. The violin creating this, you know.
It's all connected. It seems to me connected to the surrealist idea of the analogy.
Right.
That the encounter is really an analogy that for the surrealists was unlikely or extraordinary or incongruous in some kind of way, but they're brought together either by materials or metaphor.
Absolutely. And then with the tree, David thought of the only figure in Lascaux that has a human, which is a mix of a bird and a man. There's this combination of a bird and man. So he used songs of birds, but he slowed them down extremely so they become almost unrecognizable. And then he developed a list of divisions in alphabetical order, like mid-August, mid-autumn, from A to B to Z, that were he developed a composition that mixes those two things. So there is a lot of sound into the exhibition, which I think is something that goes on from the work of that we presented early on of a man's previous in the dance. It's not a dancing bear as well as this interest in music and sound. In that particular case was the early experiments in the Mississippi River Delta of turning houses into musical instruments, right?
Have we said that video is going to be shown at the house of Aimé Césaire?
Yeah, immense screening.
Yes.
Play.
We're planning to have like a room dedicated to Jennifer and Guillermo for the video. So it's a small room. It used to be like a bathroom. And what's going to be interesting is to be completely restored, kind of a white cube, and it would be like 1 to 2 person could get in and have a complete immersive, feeling of the work of Jennifer and Guillermo. Yeah.
Well, it's a little bit like taking the tremblement, right, to the house, to the exhibition, to the the music produces a tremor of a kind, right? Kind of subliminally, and then you catch a little bit of it audibly, and in that sense, this is way beyond surrealism, man.
Also for us, surrealism was always, a revolution. Studying here in Puerto Rico, when we discovered surrealism, or when we teach, we learn about surrealism. It was already linked to the decolonization of the mind. It was already part of, like, you have politics, poetry, but then you also have decolonization, and you have, so in a way, surrealism was first and most, as we discovered, there was a politics to it, right? There was always a revolutionary movement. Later on, of course, we learn about the European and American, surrealism that we all know as well. But it was first and most for us.
Well, it's been sanitized, I think, is the thing to say, and
but at its most radical, I think,
is very present actually in surrealism.
I mean, I think exactly, Molly. The most radical aspect of it is something to the effect of it makes possible, or it reaches for the possible by taking a bite out of the impossible. Right. That's kind of the radical mode.
Yeah, but also I think maybe the other thing to say about taking all of this into the Specters of Noon is that the forces that are in nature and the forces that are in history combine and mix in this show. But they include all the questions that we would now call social justice questions. They're live in those forces as well. And so
Mhm.
there's a kind of energy to all of this that is hard to sum up because it doesn't package, right?
No, and I
It's
think
there, but it's really there. It's there in Aimé Césaire's house, and it's there in the Menil. And I wish I could come see it. I'm stuck up in New York City right now.
well, we're approaching sort of the end of the hour, and maybe if there's some last thoughts, I thought I might set up the final, the sort of layering that you're talking about, Molly, which is in the audio to the Specters of Noon video. Any last words, Guillermo? Johanna?
Well, this work that it's something that appears at solar noon. It's a type of an apparition, right? Like a specter that appears at solar noon. And of course, solar noon changes throughout, the length of the exhibition, lasts for a few minutes and then disappears. And it's a laser projection. So we, the luminosity and the brilliance of laser technology and its relationship to, materialism, militarism, and a series of other, radiation. And then there is this poem that a computer voice reads, but the way that it was developed, we used the computer voice and cut it basically, and attributed to the same voice 2 different pitches, and then put them back together. So they're perfectly in sync. So what you will hear is a strange voice divided in half, let's just say, that appears sonically at solar noon daily.
And the references are to Walter Benjamin, Roger Caillois, and Aimé Césaire, correct?
It's exquisite corpse style. It's a composition of fragments of poems of Aimé Césaire, of Walter Benjamin, a series of poets, and from poetry to literature that address the idea of noon and midday in their work.
All right, well, with that said, I want to thank everyone here this evening, Molly Nesbit, Johanna Auguiac, Guillermo Calzadilla. Thank you all for joining us. We will conclude with the audio to Specters of Noon with our very deep thanks.
High noon strikes bright, a spittle of radiances, rigged with lightning. The world is now in infinite withdrawal. A cruel swarm of light engulfs all the wrongs of history. Secret deliriums set your skull on fire in the dead calm of intense heat. A formless tangled knot unfolds in the blazing lull. Like a motionless eye that conceals a wild multitude of desires, I bring you forgetfulness of the most perilous peaks. Your soul rises, and your blood meows. Your brain is the parody of the equator. You fall in love with the guts of time, the abrupt desolation of lucid follies. Either through a curse or an invocation, you betray the world. Yet, in your tenacious self-absorption, you embrace only dead objects. Burnt stubble, absorbed by yellowness. Meteorology now determines the color of your thoughts. You believe that you are on the threshold of the final stage. Yet it is only the swerve into torpor with no end. You stare bewildered at this blinding emblem of melancholy. You do not yet see what offerings I bring. A useful dislocation of the mind. A noble mummery of refusal. A world unrealized, and a history vacated. A gratuitous disaster. I am the despot of the world because I have no shadow or remainder. I am the meridian demon. hidden under a cloak of light. I drown you with sensation. I take away your shadow. I lighten your weight and tame the clock into stillness. I am the opposite of a ghost, of a guilty conscience become a specter. My skepticism stands as an emblem of my truth. All that is human leaves you indifferent, solitary, sufficient, undivided. Your shadow lost, gilded with the gold of midday. The cloud is now your sweat, immune to past or future threats. You shine forth, as if the sun had veined the heaviness of your flesh. The sun's substance is now your own. The stars rot in the swamps of the sky, but you advance more sure and more secret and more awesome than the rotting stars. You have gone in search of the sun, and the sun, having found you instead, hits you with the force of lightning.